boys and girls. Today I'm going to be reading a story from Classic Fairy Tales, retold and illustrated by Michael Foreman. And the story today is Jack, the Giant Killer. At dawn and dusk, Camoran would wade ashore and stalk through the surrounding farmland. Long, long ago, at the far end of faraway Cornwall lived a giant and his wife. His name was Camoran, and his wife was called Chameleon. In those distant times, much of the land was covered in dense forests, and although he was the biggest and strongest giant in the land, Camoran was fearful that the Cornish peasants would get so angry with him for stealing and gobbling up their cattle that they might band together and creep up on him through the forest and try to kill him and his wife while they slept. He decided to build a great hill of boulders so high that he could see over the forest. He would build a castle on top with windows which he could see through, even when he and Chameleon were lying in their massive bed. And to make his castle even more secure, he would build his hill and castle some way out to sea. Now, although Camoran was huge and strong, he also thought that housework was woman's work. A castle, he reasoned, was really just a big house, so castle work must also be woman's work. No sooner had the idea come to him than he set Chameleon the task of collecting the biggest granite boulders she could find. Then she had to carry the huge rocks out into the sea so that a mountain slowly rose from the seabed. Only when a rock proved too heavy, even for the giantess to lift, did he lend a hand. But most of the time he sat on the ever-growing mount, clutching his huge club and watching for any approaching horde of peasants. At dawn and dusk, Camoran would wade ashore and stalk through the surrounding farmland, grabbing sheep by the handful and stuffing them into his sailcloth bag. He would tie cows' tails together and hang them 3 or 4 at a time over his shoulder. The local peasants were in despair. Winter was approaching, and they knew they and their children would face near starvation when the storm stopped them fishing, and Camoran continued to devour their cattle. They must get rid of the giant, but how? Things were about to get even worse for the local people. Now, as well as being enormous and very strong, most giants can perform bits and pieces of magic. Just little things from time to time. Well, Camoran had been very clever. He had saved up all his scraps of magic for months and months and was determined to use them all up in one great spell. He sat on his island of rocks and tensed all his muscles, clenched his great fists, gritted his horrible teeth, screwed up his eyes and grunted and groaned, and bang! From the sky above his head came a thunderclap so loud it shook houses and cottages all the way to Land's End. As frightened villagers ran out of their homes, there it was, on top of the Mount of Rocks, a castle. Camoran had magicked the castle out of thin air, a gigantic giant's castle complete with turrets and windows and battlements from which Camoran could aim his slingshot at any foe. "We can attack him now," wailed the villagers. "We need an expert," said one of the village elders. "We need a professional giant killer." Poor though they were, the people of the surrounding farms and villages collected together all the odd coin and silver trinkets and gold teeth they had hidden for a rainy day. and offered them in a leather bag to anyone brave enough to attempt to rid them of the giants. News of the prize spread the whole length of Cornwall and beyond, but no one, when they had seen the formidable castle and the size of Cormoran and his wife, no one came forward to accept the challenge, except one, a boy called Jack, who lived with his mother and father in a cottage high up on the moors. Then the news of the giants and their castle and the bag of prize money had been slow to reach their remote cottage, and Jack was anxious to get down to the seashore to see for himself. His parents begged him not to go out, but Jack was determined. He had a plan. When Jack arrived that evening, the seashore was cloaked in a thick sea mist. The top of Cormoran's castle was just visible against the darkening sky, but all below was hidden from view. Perfect, muttered Jack to himself. Just the job. And he began to dig. He dug for many hours. Deeper and deeper into the sandy beach. He had a rope secured to a rock on the surface, and when he thought his pit was deep enough, he climbed up the rope and covered the top of the pit with thin planks of wood. Finally, he spread sand over the planks, so no trace of the deep pit remained, and he sat himself down and watched the warmth of dawn disperse the sea mist. "Ahoy, Lord Cormoran," he shouted, standing on a rock and waving an axe in the air. "Wakey, wakey!" All the villagers hiding along the cliff's tops were amazed at Jack's bravery, although some were worried that he would just make the giants angry and they would all suffer. But in the castle high on the mount, the giant's snoring drowned even the sound of the pounding waves. Jack's little voice had no more effect than the constant scream of the gulls. Then Cormoran's stomach rumbled. "Wife," he grumbled, poking the sleeping chameleon in the ribs. "Wife, where's my breakfast?" "Fetch it yourself," she growled in reply. "You couldn't be bothered to steal any cattle last night because it was foggy, so you will have to go and pick up a few now." "Bah!" cursed Cormoran and stomped out of bed and threw open the great door of the castle. He was in a filthy mood and hungry. Someone was going to suffer today. He snatched up his mighty club, as big as an oak tree, and glared towards the shore. "What's that speck dancing up and down on that rock?" he muttered to himself. "Why, he is waving at me, the cheeky little devil. He'll be my first snack of the morning while I look for something more substantial." And Cormoran leapt into the sea, and with 1, 2, 3 strides was almost at the shore. Instead of running away, Jack skipped about on his rock and even blew a blast on the horn he had slung across his shoulder. This so enraged Cormoran that he raised his club and rushed up the beach to squash this tiny human fly. The beach gave way beneath him, and the sides of the pit caved in around him, leaving only his ugly head sticking out. Quick as a flash, with a chop, 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 Jack sent the head rolling back down the beach and into the waves. Jack heard the sound of cheering from the cliff tops and turned to wave at the villagers, only to see them all duck down again. A terrible scream came from the castle on the mount, and there was the giant's wife advancing towards them. Jack turned to run, but then noticed that the giantess seemed to be getting smaller as she charged through the waves. "Yes," Jack gasped to himself, "she is shrinking." Only magic had kept her and her husband so huge, and with his death, The spell was getting weaker and weaker. The sea was now up to her waist and now her shoulders. With flailing arms, she managed to reach shallow water, but was now no larger than a little girl, and now a cat, and now a mouse. At that moment, a seagull swooped down, snatched up the teeny giantess, and flew off back to the castle on the mount. No one ever saw her again. So young Jack was cheered and carried shoulder high through the narrow streets and presented with the bag of coins, silver, and gold. "We are all poor people," Jack said. "You can't afford to give me such a prize. Please keep your money." The poor people of Cornwall cheered even more loudly and insisted that Jack and his parents come to live in the great castle on the mount. And there they lived for many happy years. Jack sometimes fancied late at night that he heard a scurrying and a scratching around the pantry or in the kitchen, and wondered if it could be the teeny giantess fighting off the mice for a few scraps of food. He never laid traps and never had a cat, just in case poor little chameleon got caught. And he always made sure there were a few tasty leftovers from supper under the kitchen table. After all, she had built the great castle, and it stands on its high rocky island in Mounts Bay to this day. The end. I hope you all enjoyed that. This is Mrs. Boyd saying I love you and I miss you, and stay reading.